You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. By going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com, you can make this possible. All right, folks, so let's go right to a BuzzFeed reporter, Melissa Segura, who broke that story out of Chicago. Melissa, we consistently hear stories out of Chicago about wrongdoing for cops, but to hear the cops beat this man, Francisco Vicente, to frame other individuals, and the prosecutors knew it?
Yes, I think that that's sort of the direction that not only our reporting has taken us, but also the direction that a lot of civil rights activists are starting to look at is we know and we've heard for generations stories of police beatings in Chicago. We know this. There's historical record of it. But what we haven't done, at least thoroughly enough, is take a step back and start asking questions about the systems that have led to so many wrongful convictions in Chicago. And I think the next natural step is to look at the prosecutors and say, hey, these police officers, even if they use the most brutal means necessary, cannot necessarily convert those arrests and those confessions into actual convictions without the help of prosecutors. So I hope that that's the big takeaway that other people, that are readers for the story walk away with, is saying, hey, who else needs to be complicit to turn these, to turn those brutal acts into permanent records, into incarceration?
And look, this is after John Burge, who's now dead, who was a police commander in Chicago, viciously beat a number of black men. Folks went to prison, some for long periods of time, I believe some also for death row. Those men were released. The Chicago had to pay $40 million in reparations as a result. They fought the case all the way through, paid millions more in legal fees for this thug. And so, and this is why people somehow don't seem to understand why the public doesn't trust Chicago police.
Right. I think the other thing that's really interesting about the particular officer that my investigation that I've been writing for the last 2.5 years reveals is that, I think with the Burge instances that you're referring to, we really do have that racial dynamic, and race plays a big factor. And I think a lot of people are able to say, okay, this is a black-white issue. But in the instance that I've covered involving an officer by the name of Detective Ronaldo Guevara, is that he was a Puerto Rican man who did this in a predominantly Latino neighborhood where he grew up. And so I think what this allows us to do is ask a question and say, hey, is this really exclusively about race, or is this very much not only about race, but is it also about the culture of the police department and the way that it interacts with its citizens? And I think that that's sort of an interesting feature of our particular investigation into this officer and to the way that he operated in this community. The other thing that I think is really important is I had somebody on Twitter trolling me saying, this is such a tired narrative. We know all of this about Chicago, but we're not only saying that the injustice is happening to the innocent men who were incarcerated for decades, but what exactly is this saying to the community, to the murder victims? Were their lives not worth a thorough investigation? And that's something that I think, whether you're, on the side, if you say that you're on the side of justice, then you must be on the side of justice for victims of all races, of all beliefs, of all creeds.
What's the status of those cops and the prosecutor? Anything done to either one of them?
Sure. We have seen two things. The first of which is that statute of limitations seems to have run out against a particular officer who's accused of framing more than 50 men for murders they argue they didn't commit. 19 men have been exonerated in the course of that police work. There are dozens more who are seeking to have their convictions overturned. And the next phase that we're seeing is just a slew of civil lawsuits that could potentially cost the city of Chicago millions and millions and millions of dollars more. Most recently, a man by the name of Jacques Rivera was awarded $17 million last summer. Another man by the name of Juan Johnson this was back quite some years ago, was awarded a record $21 million before sort of the city had appealed that decision and whittled it down just a little bit. But with each of these cases, I think by my count, I have close to a dozen civil lawsuits that are pending against this particular office. I was really going to take it in the pocketbook. However, the officer is still collecting his pension. Meanwhile, one of the prosecutors we mentioned had previously served on the bench as a criminal court judge for a number of years because of his involvement or the allegations against him in these particular cases on BuzzFeed. He lost his retention, his election to stay on the bench, which hadn't happened in just decades. So that was a pretty unprecedented moment where many of these men who were convicted, or some of these men who were convicted, had spoken out against this particular judge as he campaigned to retain his position.
All right, then, Melissa Segura, first of all, great work there at BuzzFeed. Thank you so very much, and hopefully there will be justice there in Chicago.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, calling all HBCU alumni, students, and leaders into the Ford Motor Company HBCU Mobility Challenge and win $25,000 for your school. Building on their long-term support of HBCUs, Ford is looking to improve mobility in HBCU communities through innovative solutions. The winning program will receive a grant of up to $25,000 to implement the proposal. The deadline to apply is March 31st, 2019. Go to FGB.Life for more information and to apply. Remember, Ford goes further in our community. We thank them for being a part of partners here at Roland Martin Unfiltered. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.